You're listening to Beyond the Endpoint, a podcast from the Duke Clinical Research Institute. In this series, we're demystifying clinical research and answering your pressing questions about health and healthcare. You can find our full episodes at dcri.org/BTE.
What started with a venomous lizard in the deserts of the American Southwest may have sparked the greatest pharmaceutical revolution of our generation. In the 1990s, scientists discovered that the Gila monster produced a peptide remarkably similar to human GLP-1, but unlike ours, it doesn't break down quickly. That discovery led to GLP-1 agonists that we know today. I'm Dr. Manesh Patel, head of cardiology at Duke Medicine and faculty member at the Duke Clinical Research Institute. I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Emily O'Brien, a population health researcher at the DCRI. Today, GLP-1 therapies are not only reshaping how we treat diabetes and obesity, they're opening doors to entirely new ways of managing heart disease, kidney conditions, and even addiction.
Thanks so much, Manesh. We are excited to bring you the second episode in our series, GLP-1s, Diabetes, Obesity, and Beyond. In this episode, we sit down with our colleague, Dr. Neha Pagidipati, a cardiologist here at Duke and a DCRI faculty member. She shares her experience practicing medicine during this rapidly evolving time and offers her perspective on GLP-1s as a truly groundbreaking option for her patients.
So really excited to have Neha with us today. Welcome to the podcast, Neha.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here with you and Emily.
Yeah, well, I can imagine it's going to be a really exciting conversation because a lot of people, the world is interested in weight loss and these therapies, this GLP-1 receptor agonist. But before we get into those, I thought, it might be good just to start with, you've been taking care of patients in our cardiometabolic clinic, trying to help them with their cardiovascular risk and weight for a long time, certainly longer than these therapies. So what was the world like before these GLP-1 receptor agonists?
Yeah. I almost can't remember the time, but it turns out it was just not that long ago because I haven't been on faculty that long. And when I started, these didn't really exist. They were still in testing. All we had to help people manage their weight were these really old, relatively ineffective drugs. And not only were they not very effective with weight loss, and not only did they not help your cardiovascular health, some of them hurt your cardiovascular health. So we had to be extremely careful in people, especially if they had hypertension or high heart rates or a history of cardiovascular disease, which really in a preventive cardiologist practice really limited the use of these agents. It was almost like there was nothing. And then suddenly there was everything. And there are all of these agents now, more than almost we can count, that are coming down the pike that not only help people manage their obesity, but also help them manage their cardiovascular and kidney risk.
The prior therapies were really things that tried to increase your metabolism potentially. They were agents that increased your heart rate, increased your blood pressure, or surgeries. So surgeries that just tried to limit the amount that came in, or medicines that tried to make you burn off more, if you will. Has there been a change in our thinking with these therapies about what might really work?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think there's been a change because with these agents, we're still trying the newer agents. So I'm talking about the GLP-1 receptor agonists, which are the glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists, right? So I'll refer to them as GLP-1s. We're still understanding how they work. We have a pretty good sense of how they work for obesity and for weight loss, but we have a far less clear understanding, though it's growing by the day, of how they work for everything else, like their heart and kidney benefits. So I do think that our understanding of something as simple as you either increase energy out or you decrease energy in, our understanding is becoming a lot more complex. I do think that the GLP-1 receptor agonists, for the purpose of weight loss, a lot of their benefit, I think, has to do with their central effects, their effect on the brain. Because it turns out so much of obesity and weight management is actually, focused in the brain. And that's where the GLP-1 receptor agonists act.
I do want to take just a step back for a second, Neha, because I think to folks who maybe aren't as embedded in this as we are kind of on the day-to-day, they might think about these drugs in a few different ways. If you were aware of them maybe 5 or 6 years ago, you might have thought, okay, that's a drug for people with diabetes. And then there was this incredible weight loss that we observed in clinical trials. And then all of a sudden, everybody was talking about this as an obesity drug, right? And now, there's, as you mentioned, increasing interest in other potential benefits. And long-term cardiometabolic risk reduction. Can you just tell us, just at a high level, like how does diabetes drug become something that like preventive cardiologists are using and talking about and becoming experts on?
It's such a great question. I think we're going to look back on this and realize how lucky we were to find the benefits of these agents. I'll try to be brief. Many of these agents, when they initially started, I mean, the earlier generation, like liraglutide, and there were other GLP-1 receptor agonists, semaglutide as well, for sure. They were initially developed as anti-hyperglycemic agents. What does that mean? As a diabetes medicine. They were developed to treat diabetes and specifically type 2 diabetes. And then the FDA mandated that all therapies that were testing agents for diabetes also had to show cardiovascular safety. So they had to do these big, large trials to make sure that these drugs were safe for the heart. And what they ended up finding is not only were several of these drugs safe, they were hugely beneficial. And I don't think anyone expected it. In fact, I know nobody expected that. So suddenly you go from these being diabetes agents to being agents that actually decrease cardiovascular risk in patients with diabetes. Then come to realize they're also making people lose weight. And if you increase their doses for some of them, they really make people lose weight. So now there are trials that show that they're helpful for obesity. And then it turns out in patients with obesity, they help to decrease cardiovascular risk as well. In addition to that, as they're looking, they find, wait a minute, it's good for the kidneys too. Wait a minute, it's good for the liver too. And in addition, there are going to be more and more things that are in testing. What does it do for addictive behaviors? What does it do for dementia risk and Alzheimer's risk? Many more things are in testing right now. But I think we were really lucky because it was developed for diabetes and all of these other benefits were found along the way. I'm sure there were some genius people who knew this was coming, but I certainly wasn't one of them. And I think most of the cardiology community didn't realize what role these agents would play.
Well, as somebody who spends a lot of time arguing for the importance of post-marketing surveillance and phase 4 work, I think this is one example of why that can, really have a big impact on population health in terms of identifying new pathways and benefits that we wouldn't have anticipated unless, you're that one genius who understands everything about the human body.
Just a short story to maybe ask the next question. She was one of my first hires. I'm still able to say that your first hire is somebody like Neha. You're going to do good and long-term at any organization. I got a sense when we were having the conversation, Neha, when we were talking about what you wanted to do, you were really passionate about helping a group of people that didn't have access to the greatest discoveries in medicine. How do we improve public health and population health? That starts with the person in front of you in clinic. The things I want to know is, one, what drives you to do that? And the second is, how has that come to, I'll call it, the reality of what happens when somebody's trying to get access to a breakthrough like these GLP-1 receptor agonists or these drugs that make people lose weight, have better cardiovascular outcomes, and have better diabetes and other things?
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of the crux of the matter, I would say, as a practicing clinician, especially. Your first question was a great one, like what drives me and many of us to try to improve health equity and equitable access to therapies. A lot of that is driven by the patients that I see in clinic every day. That drives me to do that public health work because I'm seeing patients in clinic who really need these evidence-based therapies. And for various reasons, for different therapies, either can't get access or can't take the medications regularly. And so how do we help people do what's right and get access to what's right for them? I will say that all of those concepts have come into hyper focus with the GLP-1 receptor agonist because in some ways, there are very few therapies that are as effective for so many things that people have, and especially people who have cardiometabolic disease. These are a lot of individuals who have many illnesses, many comorbidities, right? You have heart issues, kidney issues, diabetes issues. These are people who really need therapies that are effective and simple. And so not only do we have incredibly effective therapies, I would say some of the challenges that we've seen in accessing those therapies have been unlike anything I've ever witnessed, not only because of the challenges with the access, which has to do with cost and insurance coverage, but also because the resulting absolute mayhem and chaos that have been created in the general community trying to get access. This is like the Wild West, right? Like what people are doing. And I don't blame people because they are just trying to do what they know will work for them, right? They're just trying to get access to medicine that they think and know will be life-saving for them. I totally understand it. But the things that people are doing are not necessarily safe. And I think that's something that we as clinicians have to be aware of and be able to counsel people.
Have you ever played the video game Overcooked?
No.
Okay.
that I have.
My 7-year-old is obsessed with this game, and I've actually come to love it. It's a game where you're working as a chef in a kitchen and like orders are coming in and like you're doing your job, you're figuring out the recipe, you're like, a few little barriers or obstacles. And then all of a sudden things start to get harder and little fires start to pop up, or like the entire game platform shifts and now you have to like go across a bridge to get to the ingredients on the other side. So I guess that's kind of how I think about this scenario, where we knew that access issues were problematic across lots of different evidence-based therapies for lots of different populations. And then with this particular class of drugs, it just feels like it's almost impossible to get them to the right people. And so there are lots of different layers to this. So I know we're going to talk about a couple of them, but we read these statistics like 80% of eligible people may not be on these medications. Tell us about the drivers there. Where are the little fires popping up and what's causing so much kind of chaos? And I mean, doesn't sound like anyone's come up with a solution yet. But when we think about things like 80% of people not being able to get them, is it mostly cost? Is it something else? What's the set of misconceptions and like the truth there?
These are great questions, Emily, and I love your analogy. What's interesting is that these are not the only therapies that are effective and expensive. In the preventive cardiology space, we have lots of therapies that are very effective and very expensive, whether that's PCSK9 inhibitors or for heart failure, sacubitril valsartan, or for anticoagulation, some of those anticoagulants. So there are many therapies that are expensive. And in cardiology, and especially in preventive cardiology, we've gotten somewhat used to them. What I would say is very different here is that we do not have people coming begging us for these medications. On the contrary, right? You have to really convince people to take some of these medications. What's different here is, yes, there is certainly a cost issue, no question. But there's also a demand issue here that I've never seen anything like. The number of people and the fervor with which they want access to these medications because they've seen people in their community, they've seen family members do well. They've seen commercials, but more convincing than that is they've seen their aunt, they've seen their niece or nephew. Somebody has done really well on it. And it's not just that they're doing well, lowering their cholesterol or lowering their blood pressure, which they don't feel anyway. It's impacting something that has been influencing every aspect of someone's life. I mean, to be honest, right? Having something that can potentially address that, which can potentially alleviate so much stress that an individual feels both inside and out, I think drives that demand. And then in the beginning, there was also a supply issue. So forget the cost, forget the demand. There just weren't enough drugs to begin with. So it was like every possible thing was coming together in this crazy storm that led to, I think, what we ended up seeing, which was a lot of people doing what they could. And that led to a lot of compounding, which we can talk about. It's led to things like microdosing. It's led to a whole lot of maybe not necessarily fact-based application of these agents.
Maybe take a moment just to walk us through what are the compounding pharmacies, and the people microdosing. Are they good guys or bad guys that are doing this? And FDA had a halt on that?
Yeah. The FDA has the authority in times of shortage of certain effective therapies that have an indication for a given outcome, but there's just not enough supply of those therapies. They can authorize and allow compounding pharmacies to make these agents. And when compounding pharmacies make these agents, they are not necessarily FDA regulated. And in fact, the majority of compounding pharmacies are not FDA regulated. While they can undergo supervision from the state, not all do. That's my understanding. And so because semaglutide and tirzepatide were considered to be therapies that had a shortage, there was suddenly this big uptick of compounding pharmacies that then began marketing directly to individuals. Now, the issue with compounding, like I said, is it's not necessarily FDA approved. And so there can be issues. For example, some of the pharmacies were using the salt form rather than the base form. The salt form's never been tested. I don't know what that is. We don't know what that's, right? And it could be done in kind of facilities that don't have the same cleanliness and hygiene. And there are a whole bunch of reports around that. And there could be side effects from these agents. And who knows if you are actually getting what you thought you were getting. In the meanwhile, those shortages have expired. Those shortages have been reversed. And so there is going to be a reversal of that kind of compounding allowance by the FDA. And so these All of these kind of consumer-facing companies are going to have to address that somehow, and it's going to have to stop. Now, on the one hand, I completely understand why these compounding pharmacies sprung up, and I completely understand why people want it. My concern as a clinician is that I don't know what they're getting. There are reports of the things that they're getting not being safe. And so I personally do not prescribe for compounding pharmacies. So I think things will be better in the sense that what patients are getting will be the real drug. The issue, though, still, of course, is access.
We know a lot of people are taking these compounded medications. Do we have any data on them? So there are these like theoretical concerns, right? And like I can hear this sort of push-pull in the way that you talk about this, like, oh, if they work and if they're safe, great, that could help with access. On the other hand, if they're not safe, bad for population health, right? Tell us what we know about who's taking them, what they're doing. You mentioned microdosing. Do we have anything beyond anecdote, or is it just what you've heard in your practice? And are there any initiatives that are looking to take a more scientific approach to understanding what's happening in these users?
And this is why I kind of was referring to it as the Wild West, because not only are people doing all sorts of things, we don't even know what I certainly don't even know all of the things that people are doing. And I have not seen any good, representative, reliable data on the use of compounding, the veracity of the compounded agents, and the safety. I have not seen any reliable data on that. If it exists, I haven't seen it. The same is true for microdosing. Most of the information I've gotten around microdosing has come from either my patients or from online, which is never a good thing to get your information from online. So I am not aware of any great data, but I can't think of something more important, right? Like if we don't understand what our patients are doing, you might be able to see if you're microdosing, you might be able to see if you're losing weight or not, but you certainly can't tell if you're getting all the other benefits. Right. And when I'm prescribing these agents as a cardiologist, I'm not prescribing it necessarily for the weight. I'm prescribing it for the heart disease, heart attack, stroke reduction, heart failure reduction, kidney disease reduction. So we certainly need more data around that. My understanding is that the American Heart Association is taking a lead on this and is going to be initiating a large study into trying to understand people's lived experiences with obesity, both with the GLP-1 receptor agonist and without, and understanding what's happening in the real world. So my hope is that we'll have very good data very soon.
This is Beyond the Endpoint, a podcast where we bring personal and expert perspectives on healthcare and clinical research to the casual listener. Stay tuned after the interview for a breakdown with the hosts. They'll talk through key takeaways and what this week's topic means for you.
Today, we've spent a lot of time talking about weight loss therapy with a GLP-1 receptor agonist, but there are other therapies or behaviors people should have. And getting people to do those things is incredibly complicated, especially when you don't have a physical evidence that something's working, like your weight coming off, things like that. I know you help run our cardiometabolic clinic, which has really touched a lot of lives and been a shining star of what we do, and we want to scale. How do you envision the future of what I'll call layering on therapies or layering off therapies? Like, when can I peel things back? How do we ever study that if these things work so well? What's the future of that kind of stuff?
Oh my gosh, these are excellent questions. And they're the questions that patients have every day, right? Patients ask me every day, if I start this, can I ever get off it? Can I ever stop it? And so the short answer is, we're just at the beginning of this journey. We don't yet know what it's going to look like. And some of the major questions that we have are around that maintenance therapy, are around de-escalation, if that can ever happen. It is also around the type of weight that people are losing, whether we can help people to lose fat mass more than muscle mass. All of these things are under really active investigation. And, when I say GLP-1 receptor agonist, you kind of alluded to this, Manesh, it's not just GLP-1 receptor agonist. I mean that and all the permutations, because there are many agents that target kind of different things in addition to the GLP-1 receptor agonists that are coming out that are going to hopefully help with some of these issues around, for example, lean mass versus fat mass and so forth. In terms of maintenance, here's what we know so far. Studies have shown if people stop one of these GLP-1 receptor agonist agents, usually the weight comes back on. And that's been shown in trial after trial. Now, does that happen 100% of the time? Not necessarily, but in general, same with if you stop a blood pressure medication, same with if you stop a diabetes medication or a cholesterol medication. If you stop it, those things go back up. These anti-obesity medications are the same way. because
Is there a warranty though? Is there like, sorry to interrupt, but is there like if you stop the therapy, does it come all the way back, or do you still get like, you're still maybe not all the gains, but a little bit leaner? Sometimes I tell patients, if you take a cholesterol medicine, even if you just took it for a couple of years and you stop, you're going to get the benefit of being lower risk for those few years in your future world.
yeah, there is evidence for that legacy effect, quote unquote, legacy effect in lipid lowering. We do not yet have data of whether or not that's the case for these anti-obesity medications. So to that question, we don't yet know the answer. In terms of the weight, in general, you'll see the graphs from all of these trials. The weight starts coming back almost immediately. The trials usually stop before the weight goes all the way back to baseline. So we don't know. But at least 2/3 of the weight comes back. And then I think my suspicion is if the studies lasted longer, the weight would come back. Now, does the weight come back a little bit less? Does it come back even more? Like, I don't know the answer to that. But in my anecdotal experience, my clinical experience, the weight pretty much just kind of comes back.
One of the things that I've heard mentioned in the news, and again, probably an area that hasn't been super rigorously studied yet, is this reduction in food noise that people are experiencing. And I'd be curious to, acknowledging that there's not great data on it, hear more about what you're seeing in your practice in terms of the psychological or like emotional effects after people stop. Have you seen people sort of go through that process? I imagine it's pretty jarring.
I will tell you that one of the most surprising and upsetting things that I've experienced as a clinician has been to witness how, and I don't use this word lightly, how traumatic it can be for people who have been on these agents, who have started to feel better in whatever way that is for them, whether it's because of the weight loss itself, whether it's because they could walk without pain, whether it's because they got off more of their medicines, whether it's because they were able to play in the playground with their child, whether it's all the food noise, huge, huge issue. Whatever it is for them, if it made them feel better, when that medicine is taken away from them for whatever reason it may be, it can be traumatic. And I have to say, just kind of sitting with people and just saying, like, you feel helpless, right? Because we've done everything we can. We've tried to get access. It's gone. The insurance changed, whatever it is. Kind of working through that with people and trying to say, this won't be this way forever. This will change. This will get better. The landscape will change. Everything will get better. Has been, a real learning experience for me as a clinician, and I think for many of us who are doing this. But what this says to me, I don't take away from this that this is hopeless. What this says to me is that when these agents are more accessible to more people, the number of lives that are going to be changed is going to be tremendous.
One thing I'm struck by is the want to take care of patients, but then to change the healthcare landscape is something you've done in so many different ways. And one of those things was not just the cardiometabolic clinic, but also implementation trials, ways that we change behavior, different ways that we can improve quality of care, which may be these agents, maybe access agents, but it's a variety of things. Where do you see that going? What's the future of, I'll call it, the implementation world or science going to look like for us?
Yeah, it's a great question, Manesh. And I think, I do believe that one of the greatest things that we can do to change public health, at least in the cardiovascular space, is to get the right therapies for the right patients at the right time, which means that helping clinicians and patients do the right thing and make that the easiest thing to do. And for whatever reason, we have not done a very good job of this in the cardiology space. Only 1/3 of patients with heart attack and stroke have their LDL controlled. The majority of people who need to have their blood pressure controlled do not have their blood pressure controlled. There are things we know we should be doing, but for many reasons, no one individual or stakeholder's fault, we're not doing them. What's interesting in the situation we're talking about today is it's very different. It's not that people won't prescribe these medicines or people won't take these medicines. In some ways, when it comes to GLP-1 receptor agonists, it's almost less about implementation and it's more about equity. But I do think there still will be an implementation issue for cardiology, for example, because I think even though a lot of patients may be coming and asking for these agents, they may be coming to their primary care clinician or their endocrinologist or their kidney doctor or their heart doctor, having clinicians who are comfortable prescribing them and are used to prescribing them is another situation. So there still will be, I think, some room for implementation work. But I think the larger question that you're asking is, how do we make people healthier? And yes, it's about finding new medicines, but it's also just about using the ones we got and using them in a fair, equitable manner. And I don't have the answer, but that's why you have to keep me on faculty, because so we got to figure it out.
You're right. And it's really fun to do this podcast with Emily because she's thinking a lot about how do we help population health and how do we make the observations or the science come to life. And then it's fun to interact with different people along that spectrum, whether it's one patient or multiple people in a clinic or the science behind it.
This is a complicated clinical and population health problem. Thank you for everything that you're doing to tackle this. And I think, as with all complex problems, this is going to be a team effort, one that I think really, requires a lot of different perspectives. But I think there's, reason to be hopeful about, movement in the future. And I love what you said about, the patient motivation that's inherent here. That's got to be so gratifying as a clinician to see people really clamoring for these therapies. As long as that continues, I think we could be in pretty good shape if we get some of the access issues sorted out.
Absolutely.
I mean, that was a great conversation, Emily. And one of the things that really brought to life how much times are changing is sort of how Neha described the GLP-1 Wild West of access. Many people for the first time coming into clinics and different places saying, hey, can I get this therapy? Because I both want to potentially feel better and lose weight, but I hear it's also good for my diabetes or heart disease, et cetera. I reflect on that and think, I believe this has been true for other therapeutics, but this really has a drive from our patients because they can feel and see the differences.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to hear this sort of like Wild West theme kind of throughout this conversation of starting with this Gila monster who, as you described, may have launched this incredibly groundbreaking area of both medicine and clinical practice as well as research. And then also just all the chaos and lack of understanding of the environment and all the different factors that go into why one medication might work better for someone and why, say, psychosocial factors might be an important consideration for deciding sort of which therapeutic strategy is chosen. In some ways, it's an exciting time, right? We're learning so much, we're making new discoveries, but the terrain and the environment is also really inhospitable in some ways, right? For people who would do well with these therapies, but may not have the resources to access them. And I heard really kind of this dual perspective from Neha that, yes, this is a crazy time. It is super exciting to be involved in this space where we're learning so much every day. At the same time, there's a depressing element to this, right? That like we finally have things that really work for people, but are running up against completely non-clinical factors that are shaping the way that we help manage this population. And so I think that this is really, in some ways, kind of a pioneering space for people like Neha, who are both seeing it in clinical practice, but also are important leaders in the research space, trying to understand how do we figure out what works best for most people. I heard a lot of excitement, but also, a little, I think, reasonable frustration with everything that, first of all, we don't know, and also all the challenges to getting people the drugs they need in practice.
Yeah, I think there's some real clinical practice questions, as you just highlighted. It's a little bit like real estate, location, location, location. And some of these therapies is like access, right? Can you get the actual stuff that works in the therapeutic way to patients? And when you can't, then we go to these kinds of things like compounding pharmacy, microdosing, all kinds of unusual things, which again, is the whole reason I think our FDA was started to regulate these things so that people aren't just out on every street corner selling some version of a real compound or a snake oil to get people to take it. And so on some levels, I think these therapeutics will push us to really evaluate and do things that you and Neha and others have done, which is to think about how do we implement things, measure it on a population level, and actually show that we're improving health for everyone, including those individuals most at risk. So I think this episode sets us up really well to continue to have the conversation about how do we get things that work to people. And it feels to me like a scale conversation. One of the reasons this exists is because historically, when something's proven, it takes patients, doctors, and health systems 10 years to adopt something that works sometimes because there's change management. And do I really want to take this new blood pressure medicine or something else? Here we're different. So the idea that now we have a growing demand feels to me like if you could get people to agree that we were going to try to get it to all the patients that needed it, then you might actually have a scale cost, access, function that could be better. Our system isn't well suited for that. Other, I guess, universal systems might be, but that's something I think we're going to have to sort out in the world we live in. So I thought it was a great conversation, really excited to be part of it. And I think it's going to push us forward, Emily.
Hopefully we'll be able to have Neha back again to kind of reflect on what she's seen in terms of moving evidence to practice over, the next several years. In our next and final episode of the series, we'll be talking with Dr. Jennifer Green about the future of the GLP-1 industry and the potential impact of these therapies across a wide range of diseases and health conditions. We hope you'll tune in. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and connect with the Duke Clinical Research Institute on LinkedIn and at DCRI News on X and Blue Sky.
This has been Beyond the Endpoint. Resources related to this episode are available on dcri.org/BTE. If you have any burning questions about clinical research or healthcare, drop us a line at beyondtheendpoint@duke.edu. We'd love to address your questions in a future episode.